December 17, 1944. The Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Private First Class. Hans Müller bent low in his icy hole, setting down thoughts in his journal that would bother him for the rest of his life. The U.S. soldiers are unlike the Soviets. Their big guns are completely different. It is not the sheer amount of shooting, although that is bad enough. It is the quickness. It is the pinpoint hitting. It is the feeling that you have zero time to respond. 1 second things are quiet. The very next second, everything blows up. Before we continue, show your support by subscribing and letting me know where you're watching from. Through the thick mist that day, Müller had seen a sight that ruined all beliefs German fighters held about the U.S. Army's power. His group, which belonged to the 6th SS Tank Army, had just begun Hitler's last chance in the West. They had managed full surprise against U.S. spots that did not have many troops. Winning felt close. Then the U.S. big guns located them. What Müller did not understand, what no German fighter pushing through those snow-covered woods could have realized, was that they were soon to meet the most deadly cannon system ever used in fighting. A setup so modern, so wrecking things, and so perfectly timed that it would shatter Germany's last big attack and show the real size of U.S. Army strength. The breakdown had started way ahead of the Battle of the Bulge. All through 1943 and 1944, German experienced soldiers moved from the Russian front to fight U.S. troops in Italy, France, and nearby lands carrying ideas made strong in harsh fights against Soviet cannons. They had learned to live through Russian heavy bombings through tough lessons. The Russians usually sent test shots, giving German men needed time to find safety. The exploding rounds would land in regular ways, allowing them to move when the fire stopped. The orders for shooting were often delayed, needing 10 to 15 minutes from the first sighting to the blast. The U.S. forces were not the same, scarily not the same. Private Otto Schmidt, an old soldier with 2 years on the Russian front, taken prisoner with the Afrika Korps in Tunisia in May 1943, would later tell about his first time facing U.S. cannons in a talk after the war. We had moved into a dry riverbed north of Tunis, great hiding spot, we believed. The Russians would have needed an hour to spot us and 1 more hour to set their guns right. We thought we were safe enough to warm our morning coffee. Then we spotted it. A little aircraft no bigger than a scout plane putting along above us at maybe 500 meters high. We almost did not notice. Such planes had no guns. We guessed it was taking pictures. 3 minutes after that, with no sound, no warning shots, and nothing at all to show it was coming, the whole riverbed exploded. Exploding rounds hitting all at once, not one after the other. Explosions in the air over us, blasts on the ground around us. In half a minute, my group stopped being a useful fighting force. I was one of 11 men left alive out of 123. The little plane Schmidt saw was an L-4 Grasshopper, the U.S. spotter's flying perch. These simple Piper Cubs grew into the most frightening plane in the German army, not because of any weapons they held, but because of what came after they showed up. German fighters found out a cruel fact. If you saw a Grasshopper above you, you had only minutes, or maybe just seconds, before U.S. big guns turned your spot into a place of death. Lieutenant Friedrich Bauer, a cannon officer who had managed shooting back at Russian guns on the Eastern Front, wrote about his shock in letters found many years later in old German Army files. I looked into American cannon methods from papers we grabbed. At first, I thought these papers were fake, just talk, meant to scare us. No big gun system could work the way they said. The perfect timing needed was not possible. Then I watched it happen myself. Near Seno, an MRT, a U.S. Grasshopper, showed up. We watched it closely, getting ready to move our cannons as we normally did. Before we could shift, before we had even worked out the numbers for shooting back at their guns, U.S. exploding rounds were hitting where we were, not shooting everywhere, not covering the whole area, but exact hits on every gun. They had figured out where to shoot, timed many gun groups from different distances, and sent all the rounds at once in less time than it took our own frontline spotters to call in map details to our main shooting office. The key to the U.S. big guns being better was not one single new thing, but a full system that brought together new tools, learning, and factory might at a level Germany could never meet. The main part was the fire control room, an idea that fully changed how cannons were used, while German gun groups worked out shooting plans one by one. U.S. gun groups sent all facts to a main fire control room that could time the shooting from many groups all at once. The FDC system relied on math worked out ahead of time. In buildings all over America, offices full of women used counting machines, measuring sticks, and math books to figure out how to shoot for every possible change in conditions: wind pace and path, heat, moisture, barrel damage, powder heat, height changes between the cannon, and where it was aimed. These lists, written in small books that could fit in a map bag, let U.S. fire control leaders find exact ways to shoot in minutes instead of hours. Hedman Vererhoffman, a math teacher forced into the German Army's gun course, looked at U.S. shooting lists they had taken after the fighting. His report, kept in German Army files, showed his shocked respect. These lists show years of math done, many thousands of hours on counting machines. They had figured out the answers for every single factor we could face on the ground. Our own shooting lists were very basic when looked at next to theirs, needing lots of math done in the field for every shot. The U.S. forces had finished all the math early on. While fighting, they just found the right answer. But lists by themselves could not show why U.S. cannons were so destructive. The biggest new thing was time on target, a way of shooting so modern that few other countries could do it. Time on target, known by everyone as TOT, made the big guns fire together so that exploding rounds from many gun groups shot at separate times, based on how far away they were from the mark, all hit at the same moment in a 3-second period. The result was terrible. German fighters got no heads up, no test shots, no slow increase in shooting. One moment, quiet. The very next moment, many dozens of rounds exploding together, soldiers out in the open, who could only stay alive against normal guns by falling flat at the first blast, had no chance to move. Research done after the war showed that 6 out of 10 people killed by cannons happened in the first few moments of a heavy attack. Time on target caused the most deaths by taking away any signal. Sergeant Kurt Zimmerman, who lived through TOT attacks in the Battle of the Bulge, put down in his journal, found by U.S. troops in a captured control building. It is not cannon fire the way we know it. It is a new kind of thing. You cannot hear a sound. Then everything stops. Every round hits at the exact same moment. The blasts in the air murder men who would live through ground blasts. The ground blasts murder men who would live through air blasts. There is no moment to jump for safety, no chance to get to a ditch, no time even to fall to the ground. You are just fine 1 second and hurt, or gone the next. The fast way U.S. cannons replied stunned German leaders. German big guns, thought to be some of the world's finest, could shoot in 8 to 10 minutes when everything was perfect. U.S. cannons regularly sent on-target shots in 3 minutes. This quickness came from many different things. U.S. spotters out front used modern FM radios that gave clear, noise-free talk. German groups still mostly used AM radios troubled by bad signals. U.S. radios were also much more plentiful. Every foot soldier group had many spotters out front with radios. German groups usually had 1 or 2 radios, often split between different teams. The spotters out front themselves showed another U.S. strong point. German spotters were cannon officers, often missing training or time with foot soldiers. U.S. spotters out front were people specially taught who knew about both cannon and foot soldier plans. They walked with the ground troops, stayed with the fighters, and timed the shooting as a key part of using all the Army's parts together. Plus, U.S. cannon spotters could ask for help from a whole corps' worth of guns, not just their own groups. The whole setup let one spotter time shots from many dozens of gun groups in minutes. A junior officer asking for shooting help could call down as much power as a small air attack, delivered better and faster than any plane help could give. Major Muller, the leader of a foot soldier group wiped out near St. Lo in July 1944, wrote about this ability in his last paper. One single U.S. foot soldier company, boxed in a small town, kept my whole regiment busy for 6 hours. Each time we tried to rush them, the cannons pushed us away. Not just from one gun group, but from what looked like many dozens of gun groups. The spotter out front with that company, likely a junior officer or a captain, controlled more shooting force than I could use with all the big guns of my entire regiment. We lost 400 men trying to smash 120 U.S. soldiers. We could not do it. The cannons themselves showed how much better U.S. factories were. The M2A1 105mm howitzer, the normal U.S. small cannon, was an amazing piece of design and building. Rock Island Factory had made the ways of making it perfect, letting them build it fast and exactly right. By the end of the fighting, 8,536 M2A1 howitzers had been built. Every U.S. foot soldier division had 36 of these guns set up in 3 groups of 12 cannons each. These groups all had motors, pulled by trucks or half-track vehicles that could drive quickly on the roads. Moving from one spot to shoot to a new one, a task that took German horse-pulled guns 2 to 3 hours, took U.S. motor-driven gun groups 20 to 30 minutes. The difference in how fast they could move was huge. German big guns were mostly still pulled by horses for the whole war. Even though Nazi talk showed tank groups using machines, about 80% of the movement power for German supplies and guns used horses for travel. Germany began the war with 5,000 to 14,000 horses and finished with 198,000 by February 1945. Every German cannon needed 6 to 8 horses and spent hours being hooked up, pulled away, and then set back up in mud or cold weather. Travel became almost hopeless. Private Paul Richter, put with a German gun group in Normandy, kept a careful journal that was found after the war. We saw U.S. big guns move during a fight. They shot their needed rounds, then trucks showed up. In 20 minutes, the whole gun group had hooked up their cannons and gone. We needed 2 hours at least to do that same thing, and that was if the weather and roads were good. In thick dirt or during shooting, we might need 4 hours. The U.S. soldiers would get set up in a new spot and be ready to shoot once more before we had even finished driving. We were fighting a war from the 1800s with horses against a foe, fighting a war from the 1900s with motor vehicles. The result was going to happen. U.S. 155mm howitzers brought even more terrible shooting help. Every division had 12 M1 155mm howitzers in their own group. These cannons, firing 43-kilogram rounds up to more than 14,000 meters, gave the division leader a huge hit that could wipe out strong buildings that smaller shots could not break. The 155mm gun was by itself a great success of design. Planned in the late 1930s and made the standard in May 1941, it brought together distance, pinpoint hitting, and staying working. 10,300 were built while the fighting lasted. The cannon could be pulled very fast by a truck or half-track vehicle, making quick moves possible. It could shoot 4 rounds each minute, though teams that were well taught could quickly fire 6 rounds a minute. But even these division tools looked small next to the guns offered at the Corps and Army levels. U.S. Corps cannons usually held groups of 155mm guns, 8-inch howitzers, and even huge 240mm howitzers. These guns able to smash any strong building could be asked for by the spotters out front at the group level. The stacking up of shooting power meant one small rifle company could in minutes call down shots from division, corps, and even Army cannons. German big guns, on the other hand, were set up in a very stiff way. Corps and Army cannons were separate bosses, not allowed to help division work without a lot of talks and okays through many different offices. German foot soldier divisions had their own guns, but asking for shots from corps cannons meant sending papers through division to corps, often taking hours to get an okay. By the time the rounds arrived, if they came at all, U.S. fast-moving fighting had moved the battle line. Lieutenant Joachim Weber, a spotter out front, who had asked for corps cannon help during the Normandy push, wrote about his feeling of being upset. I called for Corps' big guns at 9:15 in the morning. The enemy was gathering tanks for a sudden rush on our spot. I gave the exact map numbers, said what I was shooting at, and told them the fighting picture. At 1:30 in the afternoon, 4 hours later, I finally got the shooting. 3 shots. By then, the U.S. tanks had finished their push and left. Our spot was taken over. I lived only by chance. The corps cannons, which might have rescued us, got there too late to make a difference. The clever, complex tools of U.S. big guns even showed up in the exploding rounds themselves. While Germany fought with not enough powder and rounds that were not always the same, the U.S. factory system handed over rounds in amounts that seemed endless, made to exact rules that made sure they worked the same every time. More importantly, the U.S. forces started using the changeable time exploder, the VT exploder, an amazing machine that would turn out to be the key to winning. The VT exploder, also called the closeness exploder, held a tiny radar sender and catcher in the front of the cannon round. The sender sent out a radio wave. When the round got near the earth or any other thing, the wave that bounced back caused it to blow up. This meant the round exploded at the perfect height for the most killing power, usually 10 to 20 meters over the earth. The VT exploder totally changed how well the big guns worked. Normal time exploders needed someone to work out the exact flight time to the target and then set the exploder to match. Wind, heat, gun barrel damage all changed how long the round flew. Even little mistakes meant rounds blew up too far up or dug themselves into the dirt before going off. The VT exploder took away all those changing things, promising the best air blast no matter the weather or spot. The VT exploder was first used in a real fight by the USS Helena on January 5, 1943, taking out a Japanese dive bomber near Guadalcanal with only 2 or 3 shots. All through 1943 and 1944, VT exploders were shown to be horribly strong in Navy air defense and against V-1 flying bombs over England. But worry about the secret tool ending up with the Germans stopped it from being used in ground cannons across Europe. General Dwight Eisenhower directly asked for the okay to use VT exploders during the Battle of the Bulge, saying that how well they worked was worth the danger of the secret being lost. The Pentagon at first said no, but Eisenhower complained strongly. The official permission came on December 19 to 21, 1944, just after the German attack started. This was the first time VT exploders were used against ground soldiers in Europe. The choice turned out to be right. VT exploder rounds smashed German groups found outside during the main Ardennes attack. Navy air defense tests had shown VT exploders were 3 to 4 times better than normal exploders when facing V-1 flying bombs. VT exploders took out 79% of all targets that came in. The deadly shrapnel area covered 3,000 square feet compared to 60 square feet for normal exploders. Some reports guessed that VT exploders raised how well the big guns worked by 200 to 700%. Soldiers who had figured out how to live through normal cannon fire by finding any low spot in the dirt learned that VT exploders made those hiding spots useless. The rounds blew up over their heads, raining down with killing shrapnel that hit men lying flat in small ditches. Private First Class Hans Müller, whose journal began this story, lived through a VT exploder attack and wrote down what he felt. We had been taught on the Russian front to fall down flat at the first blast. Even small dips in the ground gave safety from shrapnel flying sideways. But these rounds, these devil rounds as we named them, blew up high above. The sharp pieces fell down like water. Men in dirt holes, men who should have been safe, were killed by shrapnel that dropped straight down. There was no way to fight back unless we had deep shelters, and we did not have time to dig deep shelters. We simply passed away. The mind side effect of VT exploders made their body-killing effects worse. German fighters taught to move when the cannons fired by finding safety found their teaching was pointless. The idea that only a solid roof could keep them alive caused them to freeze up. Some groups would not leave their safe spots, even when told straight what to do, because walking outside meant sure death if U.S. big guns shot at them. Lieutenant Friedrich Bauer wrote about a time his men almost fought back in his group during the last few weeks of the Ardennes attack. My company was told to rush a U.S. spot 300 meters away. The men said no. They had seen what U.S. cannons did to soldiers out in the open, mostly with these big, new exploders that blew up high up. I tried to explain we would still die if we did not charge, that the U.S. troops would soon take over our spot. The men stood still. They chose the chance of being caught instead of knowing they would die from U.S. big gunfire. The factory power that built U.S. cannons and rounds in such huge numbers showed another way. The U.S. was better that German fighters could not understand. Rock Island Factory by itself built more than 10,000 15mm howitzers. Many factories built 155mm howitzers and bigger guns. Round making hit massive amounts during the whole war. German building efforts held back by Allied airstrikes, lack of things they needed, and poorly managed use of factory power never got close to U.S. numbers. German cannons were often better made than the U.S. ones, but Germany built too few of them and did not have the factory power to keep building them as the fighting went on. By 1944, German gun groups often worked at half power with cannons ruined or broken down and no new ones ready. Even worse, German round making could not keep up with heavy use. German gun groups were often held to very small daily limits, sometimes as few as 2 to 3 rounds for each cannon every day. U.S. gun groups had no such limits. Spotters out front could ask for shooting any time, knowing that the store of rounds was pretty much endless. Lieutenant Werner Vogel, a German cannon officer, wrote about the round shortage problem in his war journal. We were given 50 rounds for each gun for the whole week. 50 rounds to help a foot soldier, regiment facing constant U.S. attacks. I was forced to explain every shot to my group leader, saying why this certain target was worth using up rounds that could not be replaced. At the same time, U.S. big guns shot thousands of rounds every day with no clear worry about saving them. We fought the war like people with little money against a wealthy foe. The huge difference in round supply showed up in how we planned to fight. German cannon rules focused on shooting many rounds at very important targets only after a lot of thought and permission. U.S. rules focused on shooting back, fast, and right away, ready to help the ground troops fight. A U.S. foot soldier team leader could ask for and get cannon help in just minutes. A German team leader might wait hours for shots if he received any at all. The moving and handling of rounds further proved how much better the U.S. was. U.S. cannons were all motor-driven, supplied by lines of trucks that could bring thousands of rounds to the front spots within a few hours. German cannons, pulled by horses and often needing train travel for moving far away, found it hard to keep enough rounds at the front. When Allied planes kept stopping German train tracks, round supply got harder and harder. U.S. moving of goods also gained from everything being the same. The M1, round shot by 105mm howitzers, used the same exploder as round shot by 155mm howitzers and bigger guns. Making everything the same made getting supplies easier, lowered the need for extra parts, and made sure exploders were ready all the time. German round making, hurt by many exploder types and gun sizes, had long-lasting shortages of certain parts, even when the total number made was still okay. The U.S. cannons being better created a huge chain of bad results for German fighting choices. German leaders, knowing that putting many troops together would call in terrible cannon fire, spread their groups out. But spread-out groups did not have much fighting strength and could be beaten one piece at a time. Groups held close together could create fighting strength, but turned into targets for U.S. big guns. Both ways led to losing. The Ardennes attack, Germany's last big push in the West, showed these problems with clear cruelty. German thinking relied on mist and dark skies to stop U.S. planes from flying. The people planning the attack were right that U.S. aircraft could not work well in poor weather. They missed the fact that U.S. cannons did not need nice weather. In the first few days of the attack, German tank and foot soldier divisions managed to push deep into the lines of surprised U.S. troops. More than 200,000 German soldiers and about 1,000 tanks started the first charge on December 16, 1944. Then, U.S. cannons found them. Since they could not move quickly when shot at, German horse-pulled cannon groups were smashed right where they were. Having no extra rounds for long shooting back at the other guns, German cannons stopped making noise while U.S. guns kept shooting. Sergeant Kurt Zimmermann, whose journal gives lots of facts on German cannon work during the Bulge, wrote down the huge difference. Our gun group was hidden in the trees south of St. Vith. We had 50 rounds for each gun. That was our full amount for the whole attack. We shot rounds to help our foot soldiers. In 10 minutes, U.S. shooting back at our guns ruined 3 of our 6 cannons and killed most of the horses. We tried to move the guns that were left but had no horses to pull them. We gave up the cannons and walked away. This same thing happened over the whole battle line. Our big guns were shut up while U.S. big guns kept shooting without stopping. At Bastogne, U.S. cannon rounds were actually limited to just 10 rounds per gun each day on December 22nd because of not enough supply. Even with this limit, U.S. cannons were the main reason the German pushes around the cut-off town stopped. When the sky got clear after Christmas, supplies came again, and U.S. cannon fire grew much stronger. During the whole Bulge fight, 455 U.S. guns shot 125,000 cannon rounds. German groups that had pushed 50 kilometers deep into U.S. lines found they were stuck, boxed in by U.S. troops that could call for endless cannon help once new rounds came. Major Miller, whose regiment had been wiped out at St. Lo 6 months before, led a new regiment during the Bulge. His last paper, written in a war prison camp after he was caught in January 1945, gives a hard, clear view. We were beaten by U.S. cannons before we were beaten by U.S. foot soldiers or tanks. Every step we took was watched by their planes and shot at by their guns. Every time we put troops together, it was broken apart by cannon fire before we could rush forward. Every spot we chose to hold was smashed by the guns before their foot soldiers attacked. We could not travel, could not gather, could not hold our spots. We simply took in cannon shots until we stopped being a useful fighting group. The attack planned to rush to Antwerp and break the Allied armies slowed down after less than a week, stopped mostly by U.S. big guns. Groups that started the fight fully strong finished it with 30 to 40% killed or hurt, with cannon fire causing most of the deaths. The facts learned by German fighters who lived through U.S. cannons came too late to change how the war ended. Those caught and sent to prison camps in the U.S. found out that the gun system that had wiped out their groups was only one small part of U.S. Army power. The factory strength that built many thousands of big guns and millions of rounds was the same strength making tanks, planes, trucks, and every other tool for fighting in amounts that made German making look tiny. Private Otto Schmidt, caught in Tunisia and kept at a camp in Texas, put in a note that was checked by U.S. guards. I have looked at U.S. factories. I have seen trains moving big guns, many hundreds of them, driving toward the docks to be shipped abroad. I have seen workshops building rounds by the thousands. The U.S. forces beat us not through better plans or better fighters, although their plans were good and their men brave. They beat us through raw factory power. They could pay to shoot a 100 rounds when we shot one. They could pay to lose their tools and get new ones in a few days. We could not do this, could never do this, no matter how long we kept fighting. The German war prisoners who watched U.S. cannon practice drills in America saw right away the high skill and planning that made the system work so well. U.S. cannon teams practiced all the time, working on the timing and talking that let them do time-on-target shots. Spotters out front kept near the foot soldiers, working on the teamwork that made U.S. using all the Army's parts together so strong. Lieutenant Friedrich Bauer, the cannon officer caught in Italy, went to classes at a prison camp where U.S. cannon officers told them how they worked. His notes kept in German files show his respect as a soldier. They have made a whole system for everything we did with just one person's skill and smart ideas. Where we relied on gifted cannon leaders figuring out where to shoot using what they knew, and math, they built lists that let regular officers get the same outcomes. Where we relied on skilled radio people keeping the talking open when things were hard, they made radios that worked so well that even people with little teaching could stay connected. They have taken the craft of shooting cannons and turned it into a factory task, something that can be done again and again and made bigger easily. This is why they win. The change in the German prisoners went further than just looking at the tools. Many understood that German talk saying U.S. Army power was weak had been a total lie. The U.S. people they met as enemies in the fight and as prisoners in the camps showed high skill, factory power, and a way of setting things up that was better than Germany's in almost every way. Private First Class Hans Müller, whose journal told the story of his time in the Ardennes, was caught when the German attack fell apart. His journals, written later while in a war prison camp, show he fully changed his mind about what he believed before. We were told the U.S. soldiers were weaker, that they did not want to fight hard, that they relied on having lots of equipment to be better because they did not have the ability and bravery of German fighters. Those were untruths. U.S. soldiers fought with bravery and skill, but they also fought with far more tools and equipment that German bravery and skill could not beat. Most of all, they fought with a big gun system so new that we had no good way to stop it. This, more than anything else, made us lose. By early 1945, when Germany's outlook became impossible, U.S. cannon power only grew stronger. German round-making broke down because of Allied air attacks. German cannon groups lost skilled teams to death and injury and did not get enough new ones. German horses, needed for pulling the big guns, died by the thousands from working too hard, having no feed, and U.S. shooting. German groups that had used 6 cannons when the war started now used 2 or 3. Some divisions did not have any working big guns at all. U.S. cannons, in sharp difference, got better, making them kept speeding up even as the fighting in Europe got close to the finish. U.S. workshops made more big guns in 1944 than in any year before. Round-making hit numbers that let U.S. forces shoot without holding back. New tools like better fire controls, counting machines, and finer radios made them work even better. The finish arrived in May 1945, with Germany giving up completely. In the very last fights, U.S. big guns showed what they could do, things that felt like they could not be done just years before. One single group could bring massive shooting power when needed. Many corpse cannons could work together to shoot at whole map sections, filling whole squares with exploding rounds. Spotters out front could ask for ruin on any target in minutes, sure that on-target shots would come fast. German fighters who lived through these last battles kept with them a deep respect for U.S. cannons. Headman Werner Hoffmann, the math teacher who had looked at the U.S. shooting lists, was caught in the Ruhr area in April 1945. His final Army paper written for U.S. spy officers gave a skilled look at how well U.S. big guns worked. The U.S. cannon system stands for the best that fighting in the age of factories could be. They have used factory ways, building huge amounts, making things the same, and constant teaching to build a weapon system that worked better than anything before it. Single German cannons may be better made, Single German cannon leaders may be as good as the U.S. ones, but the U.S. forces have built a system that does not need great individual skill to work. Their system creates steady, massive, quickly sent shooting power no matter how good or bad a single person is. This way of building a system shows a total change in fighting that Germany never came close to and could not match because of our factory limits. In the years after the fighting, people studying history who looked at how well the U.S. Army worked in WW2 named big guns as maybe the most important strong point U.S. troops had. While tanks and planes got everyone's notice, it was the cannons that stopped German pushes, helped U.S. forward movement, and caused many deaths and injuries in the Western fight. German Army experts looking into why they lost after the war always pointed to the U.S. cannons being better as the main reason. General Franz Halder, who used to lead the German General Staff, put in his after-war study, U.S. cannons pulled off what we thought could not be done. They changed the big guns from a help-out tool into a main killing tool. Their timing, their shooting orders, their supply lines, and their factory building created a cannon force that could not be equaled or beaten. German troops in the West worked while always feeling the cannons might shoot, unable to gather without bringing in terrible shots, unable to travel without being seen, unable to fight well under the heavy load of U.S. rounds. The new fighting ideas created by U.S. cannons during the war became the base for how big guns are used today. Time on target is still the normal way to time cannon shots. The main shooting offices are still the heart of how big guns work. Spotters out front who work closely with moving troops are still key to getting fast shooting help. The core setup made by the U.S. in World War II lasts even now. The closeness exploder was such a huge step forward that how much it really did was kept secret for years after the fighting. The fear it caused, mixed with the body harm, often shattered a group's ability to stick together. German fighters caught outside by VT exploder rounds had no good way to protect themselves. For the German soldiers who stood against U.S. big guns, the whole event left lasting marks. Sergeant Kurt Zimmermann, who lived through many TOT attacks during the Bulge move to America in the 1950s. In a talk in 1960, he looked back at his time in the fight. I have been asked what gun made me feel the most fear during the war. Not tanks, even though German tanks were worse than U.S. tanks later in the war. Not planes, even though U.S. air power was huge. Not even U.S. foot soldiers, even though they fought hard. The weapon I feared the most, the weapon that caused me bad dreams back then, and sometimes still does now, was U.S. big guns. The fast, wrecking shots that landed with no warning. The feeling that you could die without ever seeing your foe, killed by rounds shot from cannons far away. That was real fear. The story of the German fighters and the U.S. big guns is truly a story about how fighting changed in the time of big factories. Single acts of bravery and smart fighting plans were still important, but they were made less useful by mass building, full-scale teaching, and better ways of running things. The U.S. forces had built a system that boosted the skills of regular soldiers, making them better at fighting than even the greatest German fighters who used old tools and did not have enough help. The cannons that shattered German groups in WW2s were not the result of one single new idea or one smart person. They were the result of careful study, factory-like work, full teaching, and endless supplies. It stood for U.S. Army strength at its best, using factory power and smart ways of organizing to create massive fighting strength. For the German fighters who were up against this system, the whole thing changed them. They began the war trusting in German strength. They finished the war knowing that U.S. factory might and way of running things had gone beyond what Germany could do. They had learned to be afraid of U.S. big guns more than any other weapon because it showed the huge difference between German ways and the U.S.